Good morning, Sandy.
Hello.
I was out late last night. Did you miss me?
Nope.
But I was catching fish, so it was good though. You
Mm.
probably didn't miss me until you might have got a little irritated when the dog started barking when I got home.
It was okay. All I want is for you to be able to enjoy time fishing at the beach with your friends.
Yep.
That's all I want for you.
It was after work, so I did put in a full day
Mhm.
and a full day of fishing, and here we are this morning.
Yep. And it also created an opportunity for me to go to one of my favorite stores.
Oh, well,
Oh.
I didn't quite hear about that, but
But
it's a fair trade. I'm
it is a
okay with
fair
that.
trade, and you benefited from it because you have a brand spanking new pair of
Light blue
light blue
Crocs.
Oh,
Crocs
nice.
to
Yeah.
add to your
Collection.
collection.
Yes.
Yep.
I'm still waiting for the lime green ones.
Yes. You can keep waiting for
Yeah.
those. And I'm pretty sure our guest today does not wear lime green Crocs.
No.
You're going to tell me otherwise?
No,
Thank you, John.
no.
Do you even own a pair of Crocs?
My girls do, but I don't.
Okay.
No.
Well, anyway, our guest
leave
today
that?
is John Hamilton. I'll let you introduce yourself because I know you for
You know him.
for quite a few years now.
Yes.
But who are you?
I'm John Hamilton.
Yeah.
I presently am the CEO of Liberation Programs, and I grew up in Long Island, Baldwin, Long Island, and moved to Connecticut many years ago. Been a proud a board member of the CCAR board. We've been talking about this for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So, how come you grew up in Long Island and not on Long Island?
Well, and why didn't you say Long Island? Isn't it supposed to have a little bit of an emphasis on the G if you're really
Yeah,
from
some
there?
people say that. And I think I've tried to shake the Long
Oh,
Island
right.
accent. And my wife teases me every time I say, "Hey, can I get some water?"
What is-
Yeah. So yeah, I was born in Sunnyside, Queens, actually, and then moved out to Baldwin and went to Chaminade High School in Mineola, this all-boys Catholic school. It was
The
quite an
famous
experience.
Chaminade High School.
They're very good in lacrosse. They
Yeah.
were like dominant in that sport before anybody even knew what lacrosse was.
Did you play?
No.
No.
So, I ran track.
Gotcha.
But,
I've heard you present many times. We've had many conversations, but you often bring in your mom and dad into your story.
I do. I love my parents.
Yeah, talk to us about that.
My mom came over from Ireland. She was 13, and she worked and cleaned hotel rooms at 13 in Belfast from Longford to get the money to come to America at 18. And then she came in courageously
Mhm.
on the Queen Elizabeth II and never looked back, and
Wow.
met my dad, who was an Irish Catholic cop. So needless
Where?
to say, there was drinking in my
Yeah,
family.
but where was he a cop?
New York City.
Right.
Yeah. So I had some interesting stories of his experience as a cop back then.
Mhm.
And yeah, it was. I felt like I had a happy childhood, even though everybody had their issues, right? I have two sisters as well. I've got a younger sister, Mary Ellen, and an older sister, Patricia. Patricia's a nurse, and Mary Ellen is the head of psychology at St. Peter's Jesuit
Wow.
school, the only Jesuit school in New Jersey. The school that really was the Cinderella team
Yeah.
for the NCAAs this last year. So,
I'm also fascinated with what your mom did for so long.
oh, she was a waitress.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
the same place, right?
67 years
In
she
the
was a waitress.
same
Yeah,
place.
in the same place.
That's
Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah.
And she worked until she was how old?
I think in her 80s, and she only left because they closed the restaurants. So
She outlasted the restaurant.
She did. She loved serving people. Yeah,
What restaurant was that?
it's called Raynors on Sunrise Highway. She
Yeah.
did service. I remember like Bill Murray used to like coming in and asking for her because she had this great Irish brogue, and everybody loved Ellen. They called her.
Mhm.
Yeah. So and there were times that they asked her to like buy the restaurant. No, she'd rather just be a waitress. She didn't want any other responsibilities. She just loved serving people. I think I got a little bit of that from her.
Well, I
Yeah.
was going to say, one of the things that I said to Phil as we thought about talking with you today was I want to find out. John is always smiling. You are always positive. Now, Phil did let me in on he has seen you occasionally not so happy and go lucky, but
There's
you
good
have
times.
you have this energy that just comes across in such a positive way. Do you think that's from your mom?
I think so. Yeah, I felt unconditionally loved by my mom. There was never any question, and so I just think She just had me feel like I was like the most special person in the whole world.
Oh.
Yeah. My sisters remind me that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they not have the same
No, they had a
experience?
different. Well, no, I think they felt loved as well. But I
Yeah.
think I had a pretty close relationship with her, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I used to go to church with her every day, and I went to St. Christopher's every like 7 a.m. mass. So I used to get myself in trouble. I had a little ADD, but I'd never get in trouble when I got to the principal's office. I said, "I'll tell your mom in church tomorrow if you keep this up, John Author." That's what they call me. So it got me a couple of passes.
They called you what?
John Author. That's what my mother called me. John Author.
John.
Author was my middle name, and all my cousins in Brooklyn, they all thought it was one name, John Author. Yeah. So it was,
I didn't know that part.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
kind of
so-
cool. Wow. What was life like for you? What were you into as a kid, and what did you like to do?
it was like a real neighborhood in Baldwin. We used to play Ring Alivio, where the perimeters of the
Play
game.
what?
Ring Alivio was a game where you had to get a team. It was like opposite teams, and you put them in like a jail, and it would take 8 to 10 hours because the boundaries we created a boundary of Baldwin. So as long as you stayed within the town, you could be in businesses, you could be in people's houses. So it would take all day, and we'd have like 30 people on each team, and it was a lot of fun. Yeah, we do things like take our bikes. I remember it was 8th grade, and we took our bikes from Baldwin out to Heather Hills in Montauk Point.
Yeah.
It was 114 miles, and we spent a week there in 8th grade. There was very little parental supervision back then, so,
Right.
but we had some good times. Yeah, we had a lot of fun. So we just spent a lot of time playing stickball, playing football, just riding
Do
bikes.
people know what stickball is anymore?
I know.
My
Stickball was
dad grew
great.
up playing stickball in Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
great
and
game.
he
Yeah.
taught me that too.
If you learn stickball and then you get into like traditional baseball,
Yeah.
it's like so easy. 'Cause it's like, wow, look how thick this bat
Bat
is.
is.
It's going to be so easy.
So even though your dad was a police officer, like no concerns about sending you off at that age for a week away.
Oh no, yeah, no. My dad had his struggles. Sadly he died of alcoholism, and I think back then he was in World War II. He was in the Battle of Peleliu, a Marine, and so I think it was trauma on trauma, and then and just not back then. They was like undiagnosed and untreated.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I'm a big fan of Gabor Mate, and I think a lot of addiction is rooted in trauma, and I think with my dad that was the case.
Yeah.
So he really struggled with drinking, and there was some real tough times he went through with that being, but that was so accepted back then, and there was like no talking about accountability.
Yeah.
'Cause they had a badge, right, and everybody had guns, so nobody messed with people, and they can kind of do what they wanted. But I think that didn't help him.
Yeah.
So I have one sister who's had 30 years of recovery, and I had a dad that never found recovery. So I don't think I found this career by chance. I think
Yeah.
everybody.
How old
kinda-
was your dad when he passed?
He was 80.
Oh, okay.
82,
Oh, wow.
yeah. But he struggled with health issues probably for the last 10 to 20 years,
Yeah.
just because of his lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my mom, she was a pioneer. She grew up in Ireland. So back then, during confirmation, she was in the Catholic Church. You took a vow to never let alcohol touch your lips.
Oh.
So I think the church kind of intervened with a culture that had a high prevalence of alcohol use.
Right.
So she never drank. So it's kind of ironic that she never drank. But
Yeah.
Her
she would-
entire life.
her entire life, she never touched alcohol, never had one drink touch her lips because she was very religious. And she took that seriously. And her uncle also had a pioneer pin, my Uncle Jimmy, and he never drank as well. Her siblings, they kind of made up for it, but the two of them, they didn't.
Yeah.
They took it seriously.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
I know. He's got great stories. And
Yeah.
we grew up at the same time.
we did.
And John is way older than me. He's like 2 weeks older.
2 weeks older. Yes.
But it's balanced out by you looking 5 years older.
Thank you, Sandy.
5. I'm saying 5. Might be 10, but it's
I can't
okay.
believe
Yeah.
you're saying that.
It'll be a lifestyle again.
But yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
You could be the one who will be living with me for almost 30 years.
I think it
That
could be
preceded
the
you,
problem.
probably.
I
Yeah.
didn't go there, but I might have thought it.
Lifestyle. So how
So
did
you grew up in we were born in 59,
Yes.
and we grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I had a very similar experience of the freedom, taking bikes,
Yeah.
never like 114 miles
Yeah.
and staying a week away. But
Yeah. Oh, and I used to love going to concerts, and I lived across the street from Long Island Railroad. So from like 8th grade freshman year or my buddies and I would jump on the railroad, and we would just see whoever was at Madison Square Garden. Because if you take the Long Island Railroad to its end in New York, you walk upstairs, there's Madison Square Garden. And back then, concerts were like $6, $7. So I kept my ticket stubs. I think I saw like 81 concerts by the time I graduated high school.
So what, do you have like
Everybody.
top three
Yeah.
that you just
I shook
remember?
Freddie Mercury's hand at the Beacon Theater, and that's pretty
Wow.
cool. I also
Yeah.
shook Eamon de Valera's hand in Ireland before he died too. So
Uh-huh.
they're two very different people. But yeah. So you'd had Led Zeppelin, The Who, Grateful Dead. I had a girlfriend in college that was a Deadhead, so we followed the Dead for a little bit. That was interesting.
I didn't hear that
Put it
part
down
of it.
outreach back then, but at the time we were just having fun.
Oh,
And so I saw a lot of interesting groups. Yeah.
And I know you're a big music fan today.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah, still I enjoy
Yeah.
music, but back then I was really passionate about it.
Mhm.
And live music particularly, I love the communities that kind of brought people together.
80, and you have those tickets.
I had the
Do you
tickets
still have
somewhere.
them?
I probably
don't know where
threw
they
them out.
are?
I don't know
No,
where they
you
are.
didn't.
I don't know. I had the record collection too.
You probably could put
Yeah.
them all together and
Yeah.
put them in a montage
Yeah.
and sell them for like, who knows?
My idol was John Swenson, my cousin, because he was an editor of Rolling Stone magazine, and he did this rock and roll. He had 25,000 vinyls in his collection of records, so I always thought that was the coolest thing ever.
25,000 vinyl.
Yeah.
records.
I have my Sean Cassidy album right in our entertainment
Don't
center.
tell
Wow,
me.
that's got to be worth nothing
Don't-
right now.
The Do Run Run.
Don't tell him that.
Hey.
It's got to be worth nothing right now.
It's perfectly okay. We all
Yes,
have
that's right,
our
as long
own
as you enjoy it.
individual
That's
taste.
true, yeah.
Multiple pathways of music.
There were, yes.
Yeah.
Still
Yeah.
are.
It's ironic though, because just before I left, I was asked by my daughter to chaperone her visit to New York City, Madison Square Garden. They're seeing Harry Styles.
Oh, Harry Styles.
So
Wow.
we won't be taking the Long Island Railroad. We'll probably be taking Amtrak into the city.
That's
And
going to
you're
be
going to go
awesome.
see The Music Man.
Yes.
That's
gonna-
awesome.
With Hugh Jackman.
Oh my God, I love Hugh
Super
Jackman.
excited about-
He's such a cool guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
How did you get into the field of addiction treatment, John?
Well, yeah, how did I do that? I was at Marist College, and I did my internship at a state hospital, Hudson Valley Hospital it was called, and I just loved working in that kind of environment. I had a psychology background, and then I'm trying to think how that worked out. Well, I met my first wife, Katie Fitzpatrick, at Marist College, and we went to, her family was from Connecticut. And so she saw that there was a job for a state job in Fairfield Hills Hospital.
Oh, yeah.
So I applied for it and I got the job. And it was a state institution, Fairfield Hills Hospital in Newtown, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And I started for the first year working in the psych wards and the psychiatric wards in different type of settings. But we just started a family. I had my my oldest daughter then, and so I needed to work double shifts, extra to bring in money because didn't pay very well.
Yeah.
And so I did work a lot of extra shifts, and then one day I worked a double shift in the drug treatment program. It was called Eden House, which stood for End Dependency on Narcotics. It was a therapeutic community. And I remember when I first got over there, and I just fell in love with the people that were there and the work, and I was like, wow, this is where I want to be. So I applied for a transfer and got an opening there as a rehab counselor 1, as they call it, and then I started my career there at Eden House, which was the drug treatment program. Back then, it was like early 1982 and 1981. There was a drug program called Eden House, and then there was alcohol services, and then they had a detox, which we call now withdrawal management, but they were all separate. And
You call detox withdrawal management?
withdrawal management is the new term.
I didn't
Gotta
know
get
that.
with the
See,
program, Phil.
I still call it detox.
Yeah, no, it's
I'm
withdrawal
behind the
management.
times.
That's pejorative, the withdrawal with detox, right? So it's withdrawal
It's
management.
pejorative?
Yeah, detoxification. Detox. It's just not a appropriate medical term. It's withdrawal management is the appropriate medical term.
It seems appropriate to me. I poisoned my system, and now I got a detox from
Yeah.
it. But that
That falls, kind of, doesn't that seem to lean towards moral failing than a medical disease?
No, I can poison my system with anything.
I guess you could. Yeah, you're right.
I
yeah.
mean, so
Yeah.
I need to detox from
Yeah.
it. But anyway,
Maybe this
or
is
withdrawal
just the first
management.
time you're hearing it.
Well, no,
It's
I
like
do.
the
I-
language of recovery.
Yeah.
withdrawal management. It
So you're
sounds
just
like
making
it.
fun of it
Yeah,
out of the
No,
gate.
yeah.
of course I am, because
Yeah.
that's what I do. And then I might come
Yeah.
around, but it sounds like a financial thing to me.
So I went to
It looks like a bank thing.
Yeah.
You got to you got to manage your
Withdrawal.
withdrawals. You're
I
taking
had-
too much out.
I hadn't thought of that one. It's an effort to try to change language. Language is important, Phil. You told me
I
that. Yeah.
know, I know.
Very.
So Fairfield Hills, it was a great experience for me. And so I started in the drug treatment program, went to every training I could. Back then, you do week-long trainings at the Mercy Center and tried to like learn so much about the field. And the piece that I started picking up on is the individuals that were there as a long-term therapeutic community. It was like 18 months. And the first year, people stayed there. In the last 6 months, they get a job in Newtown. So it was like they had its like own reentry, own like halfway house as
Yeah.
part of the program. So they did a lot of things right?
Yeah, it seems like they're ahead of.
Yeah.
Mm.
But they did a lot of things wrong too.
Mm-hmm.
It was this concept of, it was social learning theory, which is based on the idea that you break somebody down and you build them up again. And I started picking up pretty quickly that people were pretty broken when they came in, and they didn't
Right.
need any shame-based interventions and wear a dress or get yelled at and get put on the stop. But that was the model. You know, one of the concepts that I liked was peer confrontation and peer community. That the community was the healer. But the community was very insulated because it meant the therapeutic community.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole field started with this guy, Chuck Dieterich, that I think he
Yeah.
got upset because he was telling war stories, and Bill Wilson reminded people in the grapevine that, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous is for the alcoholic, and so he got upset and he started Synanon, and then Synanon branched off into, you know, Daytop and all these other therapeutic communities, and that's what Eden House ended up being. So the concept of the community was great, but some of the things they didn't do so well is confrontation. You know, one of the things I learned from my friend Bill Miller, who you know, is really somebody I always admired in his work, motivational interviewing, but he knows that we don't know a lot about treatment and what works, but we know what doesn't work. And confrontation, shame-based interventions doesn't work. So I didn't like that aspect. Then another aspect in treatment back then was probably not a great concept, which was drinking privileges. So after a year of somebody being in treatment, they would apply and they'd say, Sandy, I've never had a problem with alcohol, so I'm going to apply for drinking privileges. And they were granted when, you know, if they hadn't had a problem, and they said they didn't have a problem. So Sunday night, sometimes I would bring people back staggering into their bed, and if the next morning there wasn't any opiates or quinine is what they had in the urins back then they graduated treatment. And then sometimes they'd even have a keg party, because there was this like real split, this bifurcated system with drugs and alcohol, and even the staff didn't get along and the communities didn't really mesh. And back then, there was no NA in Connecticut.
Right.
So they really thought that they were there. You know, that was the only pathway, or one of the. There's two pathways for recovery for somebody with an opiate disorder. It was medication-assisted treatment at the time. It was methadone or a therapeutic community. And people weren't so welcome in 12-step recovery. So I'm glad that that's changed. So then, after a couple of years at Eden House, we realized, well, wait a second, everybody's polysubstance users, and we have one treatment for alcohol, and you know, we're doing the same thing here and there. Why don't we combine models? And I remember getting together with the alcohol counseling staff and the drug treatment staff, and there were almost fist fights because everybody felt so strongly about their beliefs. I was a little more, I think, a little humbled than most of them, because I was realizing we weren't doing such a great job, because there was only a small percentage of people that graduated. People that graduated, oh, they did great, but how many people got through 18 months? A very small amount of people. So we knew we could improve. So I think we took the best aspects. We took some of the behavioral aspects of like looking at the behavior from therapeutic communities and integrated that with embracing self-help support from the alcohol treatment, and we created this model called Berkshire Woods Treatment Center. So Eden House had morphed into Berkshire Woods, and then allowed people to come in with alcohol and opiates, or any substance, and we would treat them as one model. And then it pared down to 90 days.
What was your role then? What were you doing?
Well, it was interesting you say that, because I started as a counselor, and I'd been a counselor for a couple of years, and then I noticed I was trying to pay attention. You know, I learned early on is just maybe you should just listen to your clients at the time, as we call them. And so if I, like I would see the clients come in for drinking privileges and say, Sandy, I never had a problem. And I come in and, oftentimes they did end up with a problem or had a problem. But the people that were really serious about their recovery, they would say, I don't know, Sandy, I'm not so sure that drinking is a privilege for me. And I'm going to just stay away from that because I think it might actually trigger my drug of choice. So those people usually did well, right? But back then, the therapeutic communities used to hire people. They used to have, we didn't do this, but other therapeutic communities used to take people out drinking. And I remember smart people. Dennis Buffard, one of them, by the way, who wrote the ASAM criteria. I remember him in a meeting saying, we got to get them out of where they were. They used to call them shooting galleries, and bring them into bars so they can make new friends. Right. And it seemed like such a great concept. Like, that's what people need, is social connection. But didn't realize it was a little more harm reduction than and a little less effective than we actually thought it was going to be. Yeah. So I say that. So that's like paying attention to what the person in front of me to really see what works. Yeah. The other thing I paid attention to is the individuals would have family visits, and I started to do a family orientation program and bring families in. And the individuals that had family involvement while they were at Berkshire Woods and previously at Eden House, those were the people that ended up being the ones that graduated, coincidentally. So I said, there's got to be something here. So I went back to school and I got a graduate degree in marriage and family therapy. And so I feel like that really helped me understand systems. It kind of helped me ultimately in my role later in management to see like a company as a healthy family system, enjoy your mate more than your kids, have rational authority, being able to explain any intervention. I mean, the same principles, right? Because people are people. So I went back to school and then I became a family therapist. And I think I ended up having to be a social work supervisor because the state 1199 and the state of Connecticut in drug treatment programs didn't have any job description for a family therapist. It was such a radical idea. So I had to take another job classification and stay in that role. So I was at Fairfield Hills 14 years, and then it closed. And then I helped them with merging some of the programs into the community, and some of the staff ended up going to Connecticut Valley Hospital.
Why did
Bridgeport.
it close?
They wanted to deinstitutionalize. We're one of the few states that still have state institutions. There's still, I think, Blue Hills and Connecticut Valley Hospital. Many states back in the 70s and 80s already deinstitutionalized because people didn't think that was treating patients with dignity and respect. There was a time Fairfield Hills did that, though. They had its own farm, and it was empowering, and then they challenging rights, and they didn't let them out and work anymore. And then they ended up, sadly enough, I saw a lot of people that seemed to be really over-medicated and not really engaged in the community. So
I had heard your Fairfield Hills story, not just from you, but from Tom, too, Tom Kirk, right?
Yeah.
And a few years ago, Matthew was playing travel basketball, and I ended up on the campus of Fairfield Hills. He had a game in one of the buildings, but everything else was it was strange. I don't even know what they used that place for.
The town took it over. So it was very political because Norwich Hospital was supposed to be the first hospital that closed, but I think they were trying to use it for negotiation for back then the casinos and all. So they abruptly moved to close Fairfield Hills instead, and there was a local legislator that was spearheading that. And so we had to make sure we got everybody's jobs. I was on the 1199 executive board then, and the union to try to help people get their jobs. And so everybody got a job that left there except me because I wanted to kind of try something else. And I heard about this liberation programs back then, and they had a senior vice president of clinical services position, and it was working with kids and prevention and adults and different types of programs. And I said, well, I could really grow and learn there. So I left the state and went down to Stanford to liberation once I closed the hospital. And right where we were closing, they were filming a movie, Sleepers. If you ever seen that movie, that was filmed in Fairfield Hills. And there's how many was there? 5 miles or 9 miles of tunnels that connect all the buildings. It's pretty fascinating.
Well, it's a little creepy too.
850 acres. It's beautiful.
Yeah, but why would they have an institution like that have tunnels connect everything?
They used to bring all the food through the tunnels, and they would.
It's still weird.
Yeah, it was a little weird. Yeah, they were usually TB units that converted into psychiatric hospitals. Yeah.
So during this time, you're in your 20s, moving into your 30s, and you mentioned that you had a sister with 30 years of recovery, and your dad never found it. So how is this playing out in your personal life, all this new knowledge and experiences?
Well, I think it helped keep me humble because I felt like I could, do some good work with the people that were in front of me that I was working with, and just trying to show them love and paying attention to what they need and engage with them and treat them with dignity and respect, and not just basically just love them, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like that came easy for me, and I think I was with what was going on at home, because early on my sister was just finding recovery, so I felt like I was aware of the concept of powerlessness early on in my career, because I couldn't, like, she was a hot mess. I mean, even when I was up in Marist, I think I had to hide her from the police or something, and she found it, in a self-help support, and no formal treatment. And I think it gave me kind of like the humility to realize, wow, there are different pathways to recovery, and that I couldn't, I can't. And then with my dad still struggling, I was like, I can influence, but I can't, can't control the outcome. Mm-hmm. And so I think that kept me pretty humble to realize how far, I can go. So in some ways, it probably helped me not get so burnt out in the field, because you hear a lot of people that go through like, a sense of exhaustion in the field. I think a lot of times it's because they take on too much responsibility, either for somebody's recovery or for their relapse, right? And I think for me, I was able to have a kind of a healthy boundary there, because I kind of knew, my humble influence and how much I could really make a difference and how much I really wasn't. And then, it's funny because I remember seeing people even from years ago that I used to treat, and they come back and they talk about the things that made a difference. And, I must have gone to 1,000 trainings, and, went to all the kind of the best master therapists and learned every different modality and evidence-based practice. And we know how we feel about that. Mm-hmm. And they'll remember, hey, John, I remember when we went to Sherwood Island, when we went on the fish trip, the boat trip, and you paid for my canoe because I didn't have any money, and you probably didn't have 2 pennies to like rub together, because you probably got paid squat there at the state hospital, and that really made a difference. And I really realized you must have really cared. And it's like that's what they remember. That's like, wow, that makes a difference. And in my private practice, I remember I worked with this girl and her family for like 2 years, and got her on track and everything. And I ran into her like 10 years later, and she goes, hey, do you remember when it was the end of the night, my mom wasn't here, and it was raining, and you held that umbrella for me so I wouldn't get wet after the session until my mom got there? I thought that was so nice, and I really realized you really cared about me, and I really appreciate that. And it's like, meanwhile, I'm throwing all these great interventions, and that didn't matter, right? Yeah.
I think it's so true. I get a lot of students who are pursuing psychology degrees or social worker degrees that want to come and help the students at the Yukon recovery community. Mm-hmm. But in our conversation, you can tell that they want to come save them, right? And so those aren't usually the ones that I tag to come volunteer, because that's not going to work out for you. Yeah, it's probably not going to work out for the student in recovery either, but that's not going to work out for you in the long run.
Yeah.
What's your standard line about people caring and knowing?
I always tell our staff, and from early on, you need to show people how much you care before you show them how much you know.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, one of the things I've had the advantage, I was on I chaired the dissemination committee for NIDA for years, which I thought was so exciting, because it was really going to take all the research and put it into practice to like save more lives. And I got humbled in that world too, because I realized we don't know much, so, as I said, I show people how much you care before you show them how much you know. And by the way, we really don't know much. So just show them how much you care. Just show them love, and everything else will fall into place. Yeah. Get out of their way and be a good listener. So I the more I'm learning, the more I realize we know, we have a long way to go.
And you say, and I've also heard you say it this way, which I've taken and say over and over again, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And then just...
Yeah.
And the way you found that out, you started to step into leadership roles at like Liberation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But it sounds like you've been a natural leader everywhere you've been your whole life.
Well, I kind of feel like I'm like doing my family therapy work, that I try to get out of system's way and try to empower people and just try to inspire people to do their job and not, not manage but lead. And I don't know, I feel honored to have had those roles and continue to have those roles in my life.
Right. So we're kind of going chronologically. You're at Liberation, and where were you in the pecking order at Liberation?
I was, because I was low down in the pecking order in Fairfield Hills.
Yeah.
But actually, once I got my degree in as a family therapist, I also ran a private practice in Woodbury. So I've been in private practice probably for 25
And
years.
you still do it.
I'd still do it, but back then I used to have my day off was Monday because I worked Tuesday through Saturday because I ran the family program. And on Monday I would see sometimes up to 13 clients and families, and it was great because it was like individuals, couples, teenagers, adults, and it was always mixed up. And I was so energized by the end of the day, and I feel like the private practice from there to bringing it to Liberation and then to Recovery Network of programs, and even today. Helps me keep my eye on the prize, and helps me. I think back then it kind of gave me street credibility. What gave me street credibility at Fairfield Hills was I ran the weightlifting class and the running class, so I take them out running, and then I do weightlifting with them.
Canoeing or something.
With the weight, I had guys today like, they couldn't believe how much I could bench press. Well, that's because they left after 18 months. I stayed there and continued to bench press. So at one point I was able to bench press like double my body weight. People couldn't believe it.
Right.
Yeah. So So.
How do you define leadership?
I think, that's a good question, Phil. I help people find their potential, help people find their path, help people find their kind of their tribe, their kind of their community, help people feel part of something greater than themselves. And, I think I've been fiercely committed as a leader in any agency I've been to try to create a fair system where my belief is if we're going to treat our recoveries with dignity and respect, we have to treat our staff with dignity and respect first. So I really am a big fan of like giving people what they need. I'm obsessed with supervision. And I learned that from NIDA years ago, is that in this field, people weren't getting real clinical supervision. Like, what do you need to help you do your work with the person in front of you? And, just being able to have supportive supervision. They usually just got clinical supervision. DPH is coming, finish this chart, or CARF's coming in town, so you got to do this training and this paperwork. And it was more administrative and sometimes even punitive. So we learned in one of the early trials at NIDA, like the MI trial, motivational interviewing. It was a trial to see if you did motivational interviewing with somebody and during an intake, if they would stay in treatment longer, and they ended up staying in treatment up to 50% longer than those that were randomized in the regular treatment. What we didn't realize until we kind of dug deeper is those staff members that got training and fidelity of model and regular supervision by being part of that trial, they stayed with the agency 50% longer. So we really looked at that, and we had this guy, Paul Roman, study it from University of Georgia to find out that in this field that had this high turnover rate, I think at the time, Tom McClellan used to say it was the same as like McDonald's service workers, the turnover because of the burnout, that outside of salary, we were able to study this and see that good clinical supervision is what retained people, and supportive supervision. No supervision or bad supervision is what drove people out. So people didn't really work for their company for the most part. They worked for their direct supervisor, right? That's where their alliance is. So as a leader, I want all of our managers to not micromanage people, but inspire them and lead them. And I have to feel like I have to do that too. I feel like my most important job for the staff and for the people we serve is offering hope. So that's what I try to do, and the hope is like giving them a belief there's a bright future, there's a career path, it's a noble and honorable career to be in addiction treatment, and I truly believe that. So I put my money where my mouth is and try to pay people as much as we can and give people incentives, and we set up these performance incentive programs that I thought were pretty innovative, and try to really just value people and recognize them, and I think that becomes like a key piece is offering hope. And I think it means just being able to like speak the truth, tell people what you can do for them and what you can't, but follow through with what you can.
Yeah. I think that's where the whole evolution in all kinds of workplaces move towards coaching, a culture of coaching, so that we can all be better and be truthful. And I work in an environment where there's no coaching culture, and you can see how difficult it is for folks because we're trying to present that we know everything.
Yeah.
But you were one of the first, I think the first in the country to name a chief recovery officer as a role.
Yeah.
Maggie
Young.
Share about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I certainly found the right person in Maggie Young.
Did.
I really believe that. And again, I know that we use clinical supervision as a clinical term, supervision. I think coaching is a better description, Sandy, to what we really want to do is be a good coach and inspire our players to be out there and believe in themselves and feel part of something and have your back. Everybody feels like everybody just needs somebody to have their back. I notice that in marriages too, and when I do couples counseling. But at the end of the day, all the couple wants is to feel like the other person has their back. And when do they come in to see me? When that breaks down, right?
Yeah.
So that's so that sense of I got your back, I got this. You're going to do the work, but I'll have your back. And so I think that there has been this bifurcated system, and that was part of my honor of getting involved in CCAR and this disconnect between the treatment community and the recovery community. And I kind of feel like I helped bring that, bridge that gap in a small way here in Connecticut, because I think I was the first agency to bring on a recovery coach. Maybe 15 years ago. We were the first, when I was with RMP, I think we were the first people to bring on recovery coaching, and we had, you called supervision then. What did you call it? And we never called it supervision.
Performance support.
Performance support with Phil
Yeah.
and who else do we have? We had
Did you bring in Art?
Art.
Art Woodard?
Art. I think Art did it as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So just going into leadership, I'm a fan of John Maxwell, and I read a lot of his books, but there's always one concept that has rung true with me for many years is that leaders create other leaders. And that's what you're more or less saying. You're coaching people so that they can lead their own job, and then they can go and create other leaders who are leading their lives, not just others, but they're leading their lives. I also know that you're a big proponent of workplace culture and organizational culture. So talk about that and what that means to you. What do you try to do?
Well, we want to take pride on being a recovery-friendly workplace, and even before that, I think it's the sense of having again, it's like a parallel process where people come into recovery regardless of their pathway. They need to have a safe place. I want our agency for our staff to feel like a safe place, not a gotcha mentality. Feel like we're giving people what they need to do their job, and if not, we need to know what we can do different. It's kind of the same concept of there used to be they used to have these dimensions for assessing people to come into treatment, ASAM, and I was on the work group, I remember years ago for residential, and it was, I think dimension 4, or 5 was client acceptance or resistance. And I was like, well, wait a second. Why are we, putting that on the person who's coming in? It's that idea that the only person resistant is the counselor who's being resistive to paying attention to what that client needs in that moment, right? Yeah. So I really think that we have to take responsibility for creating a consistent, fair culture for that people see that they can have a bright future, whether they come in as a recovery or if they come in for a job. And then we're really trying to bridge that gap too. We talk about workforce. I talked to Rob Lambert the other day, who runs a program that has medication-assisted treatment. I said, one of the challenges in the workforce for getting people in recovery is people on methadone maintenance. Somebody can be in stable recovery for 10 years. So I can get somebody who goes through Liberation House, goes to Bridgeport, goes to CCAR, gets their recovery coach training. I got to give them a job in a year or so, right? Meanwhile, I got somebody in stable recovery that happens to be on methadone, and we can't hire them because they have an open chart, and they can't have an open chart and a personnel file at the same time. So in talking with Rob, what I want to try to do is have a system where I will hire their stable individuals on medication-assisted treatment who get training through the Recovery Coach Academy, and and they can hire ours. And then this way that we have open access in the field. But that's like one of the ideas of like really being able to kind of, validate the different, pathways to recovery and give people a chance.
Right. So what is the barrier to not? You just simply said you can't have an open chart and an employee.
The dual
file.
relationship. Yeah, it's a conflict, I think, with like Department of Labor. I talked about this way back when Tom Kirk was commissioner, and he said there's no way we can do it. And they were the single state agency. So when they said no, it's like, we got to listen. Yeah.
So
I tried to take on leadership role with DMHAS, as
No,
chairing the DMHAS State Advisory Board to try to make a difference. I think they do great work, by the way, with DMHAS compared to like I go through a lot of different states where there really isn't too much innovation going on. I think Connecticut has been fortunate to have a state agency that recognizes a recovery-oriented system of care and really kind of embraces innovation.
But I'm trying to understand, we always talk about dual roles, right? Especially in clinical treatment and thing as being like almost taboo. You can't do that. And I'm like, why? I mean, what's the worst case scenario?
I think it gets complicated with, I just need to have my HR director here and talk about the challenges, but I think it is like a Department of Labor challenge that people are protected, they have certain rights in recovery, but if somebody is in recovery and they want to have their, they're protected by CFR 42, Part 2, the HIPAA, all that. But you are and you aren't when now you're in the, you have a personnel file as well. So if somebody might be struggling in their recovery, they should be able to keep it separate from work. Although one could argue that if you have a recovery-friendly workplace, we have, somebody struggles, our first primary focus is to get them help and recovery and get them on track, right?
Right.
But it's I think it becomes more of an issue with might even be an issue with the dual relationship if somebody's at the same clinic as somebody that they're working with. I think it blurs the boundary a little bit. It's maybe not keeping them staying in their lane when they're facilitating groups and they're also in the same group with somebody. It might be just a little bit of a challenge.
Been my issue.
The staying in the lane or the bringing it together?
The lines are, we try to make such clear lines and that you do or you don't. And I think just like life, just like recovery, just like all of that, there's a big gray area between the boundaries.
There is.
And we don't want to go dive into the gray area.
Yeah.
We'll make a rule not to go there.
You know who's helped me with that gray area? Is my new senior director of harm reduction services, Liz Evans.
Oh, yeah.
Helps me because Liz Evans meets people where they are without judgment and without our agenda. Mm-hmm. So she wants to bring people in that are still out there in the lifestyle to be able to, do outreach work, for overdose prevention. And that is the norm in harm reduction. But again, that becomes like a radical concept. We see somebody's like rap sheet coming in as their resume if they're a person in recovery, and that's part of their story. So we embrace that. As long as it wasn't last week or they're still on active probation, that gets a little, dicey. But Liz is, kind of the same concept of like, well, if the person is, still out there, then they could really help us in the community. Mm-hmm. But that becomes, a kind of a challenge sometimes too from a personnel standpoint. By the way, you should get Liz on your show. She's pretty cool.
Oh, I'd love to.
Yeah.
So all of this brings to mind two things I've been wrestling with. And one is I am super passionate that recovery is prevention, and we have to stop talking about them as very different layers. Because when we recover, we change, like that whole next generation, we change the lives of the people around us, whether they be coworkers or loved ones and all of that. But the second thing is this belief in the way people talk that recovery equals sobriety, abstinence from all alcohol and unprescribed medication. And so I wonder what you when you think of recovery, are you thinking of it in terms of abstinence-based recovery, and that harm reduction is something different?
That's a great question. Yeah. And I do see it in a way where, similar to you, I see we are in the work of prevention, right? We're either doing prevention or relapse prevention, but it's all prevention, recovery management. I know we call it that now, but it's all from that standpoint. And I support what Phil always says, that if you're in, you say in your recovery, you're in recovery, and who are we to judge? And I think that's part of I think the greatest challenges we have is to validate people and meet them where they are, which means validating their experience of what they need and what their goals are, not what we may perceive through our kind of biased lens of what we think recovery is. And I think that was part of, I told Phil this years ago. I wanted to get involved in CCAR because 19 years ago CCAR did not recognize methadone as a pathway to recovery as well as they do today. And because the people that I served went to the drop-in center, they didn't feel as welcome as other individuals. And that has changed. Now they're like running some of the recovery centers, or they're actively involved, and they see it as a pathway. Anymore. You don't even know. But back then there was a kind of a differentiation. And I see harm reduction as connection, as innovative engagement. I kind of like what Mark Jenkins says, that he's the biggest enabler ever. He's enabling people to stay alive, and I think that's great, and that's the mindset I have. I don't think there should be this arbitrary kind of bifurcation and polarization of harm reduction and abstinence-based treatment. And I do think that we had to look at that even with this new grant we received from the Bureau of Justice that we're partnering with McCall Foundation, a great grant. We set this grant up to have a recovery coach and a family recovery coach respond to every overdose with law enforcement when they show up for with partnering with several police departments in Litchfield County and Fairfield County. Great concept, right? Well, yes and no. I mean, it goes back to the idea we got 10 or 15% of people that could benefit from recovery are accessing it, and the other 85% are telling us to pound sand, or they're not interested, there's stigmas there, or there's issues, right? So we create our own obstacles. So we, in bringing Liz in, she was saying, well, you've got the people that are just coming from an overdose. They probably are not having this kind of epiphany of saying, whoa, I want to get in recovery today. They're like, leave me alone. I want to go out there. I'm feeling sick, and they immediately might want to continue to manage their addiction and not be interested in managing their recovery. Are we really meeting them where they are? So even from a language perspective, we have those workers, but we're calling them overdose responders. So we're not labeling them as recovery coaches, because that would be off-putting to many of the people that we're meeting. And we're having phenomenal success. In the first month, we met over 1,000 individuals and connected to them in the community with our outreach efforts, because we're creating a safe space to not put a label on something that might be not where the person's ready. And if they are ready, then we do have recovery coaches on staff, and we do get them on board. I think, and I've told Phil this, I think I think there's a lot of flaws in the treatment system. I've noticed that, even going back to like Fairfield Hills, beyond the obvious flaw of maybe drinking privileges not being the most brilliant idea ever, I think the whole treatment model is flawed. It's an acute treatment for a chronic disease, and we have the data out there, right? The most successful programs is the physician monitoring programs and the pilot programs. Why? Because they're 5 years long, and you're giving people support and for 5 years. And the longer you work with people, and the more they stay in their active pathway of recovery, the better they get. But these models of 30-day treatment and all, they really, I think, have done a poor job, because they just really kind of stabilize somebody, send them out in the community when they need supports the most, and they're not there. So I think, again, the recovery coach model has bridged the gap better than anything I've seen, to be able to help people in a way that I think has been transformative for the field of addiction treatment. But I still think we have a long way to go. I'd like to see our whole system shift to, what level of recovery coaching do you need? What level of family recovery coach does your family need? What level of housing and basic needs do you need? And that's it. And that there really doesn't need to be that many treatment beds, honestly. I think, for some people that maybe with co-occurring issues that may need some stabilization, or they don't have any recovery capital, they might be able to start there. But I think if we had the resources in the community where people were able to get them in their home and, really meet people where they are and provide them recovery coaching and recovery supports in the community, we really could save more lives.
I think for me, and I've only worked in this field for 4 years, and I started out, because the core of my recovery is abstinence based, how do I celebrate? Like it became as simple as, how do I celebrate? Because I don't know where you are if I don't have this timeline of 24 hours or 7 days or 30 days or 90 days or whatever it is. But I think it brings back to what you talked about in the beginning of your work, that it's shame-based, and that, if you return to use, if you are abstinence-based, you haven't lost what you've learned. You've learned that the last phase of what you've been trying didn't work for you, right? When you return back to whatever plan, or if we take a look at, how cancer progresses, sometimes the chemo doesn't work and you need the radiation or you need the surgery, but you keep evaluating it. You're still in recovery from the diagnosis. So anyway.
Yeah, and I used to always say that there's, every lapse can be a potential. I used to call it a prolapse, which isn't a great medical term, but it shouldn't have to be a relapse. If you learn something from that lapse, then you're actually strengthening your recovery. Yeah. And I always wanted to put a positive spin on it, because I really believe that if you learn something, then you're strengthening your recovery. But I think like in 12-step recovery, the idea of like your clean time, that's like blessing and a curse in my experience in my career, because I've seen people that when they have had a lapse, there's the deep sense of shame or not going back or losing their coins and their years of sobriety has them go underground and has them lose hope in a way that I don't think was ever intended, right? Because self-help support is supposed to be hierarchicalist. Well, it's not really hierarchicalist when there's this subtle, like informal hierarchy of how many years you got in sobriety. I don't think that serves a lot of people to give them a sense of what they need to be present and a sense of hope. So I do think we really want to kind of revisit that concept of that still, being something that's going to get in the way of somebody getting help, or if they have a lapse, being able to continue to get help. And I think that's what I've struggled with too over the years with our staff who have been, in recovery. And if they have a lapse, sometimes they feel like, the standards are higher in their own mind, that they're expected to be perfect instead of human. And oftentimes when they crash and burn, it can get really deadly, and it can, because they do it underground. And I think Robert Heimer even had a study with individuals in Connecticut, which was really disturbing to. It was like a wake-up call. I don't know if you heard this, but he studied like injection drug users in Connecticut, and he said that if you were a person in recovery for opiate use disorder in Connecticut, you were twice as likely to die of a heroin overdose or now a fentanyl overdose than if you're still using. Right? That's like shocking to me. It's like, well, that shows we're doing something wrong. But it makes great sense, because if you're still using, you're using with somebody's got your back, and somebody's usually there with you, and you got Narcan around. If you lapse and in recovery, you're usually having a lapse alone in secret, with shame, with no Narcan and nobody around. You're more likely to die. So we've got to change that messaging. Well, again, harm reduction, as I see, is also, if you're from a clinician standpoint, it's like pre-contemplative or contemplative. It's stages of change. A person's not there yet. You've got to meet them where they are. My private practice in 30 years, that's all I've done is harm reduction. Somebody comes in, I'll work with them wherever they are. If they want to get, if they're ready to find recovery, I'll get out of their way. But if they're not there, I'm going to try to keep them alive. The goal of a first session is to have a second session, right? So they can come back and feel like there's they can continue to get some help.
Yeah. I think TJ, one of CCAR's leaders and recovery coaches, says it best, because he's been Narcan so many times, and family members have been, that I can't get into recovery if I don't have a heartbeat.
Yeah, that's well said.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about the 12-step community. In the recovery community, we're also, as a member of the recovery community, are hung up on length of sobriety and all that. And I've always questioned, do you measure recovery cumulatively or consecutively? And we're like in this consecutive mode. It's like the Yankees are only good as their latest winning streak. They don't, from their last loss. Yeah. They don't, they've won 100 games, but they've lost 60.
Yeah.
One guy early in my recovery said, I've been in recovery 10 years, minus 3 days.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what I did.
That's real.
Like that.
Yeah.
That just stung me because
That's a hopeful story.
Challenged my perspective.
Yeah, and I like that narrative because that's real, and that's a hopeful story to give him the credit. I think we've got emphasis more. The emphasis has to be less on the absence of symptoms and more on the presence of health.
Right.
So should it even be chronological?
Right.
Because I've worked with people that have had 30 years, and I've worked with people that have had 30 days, and sometimes the person with 30 days is a lot more self-aware, present. They can much better job with self-regulation and mood regulation than somebody with 30 years who starts, by the way, sometimes believing in their own hype.
Right.
And then and that's. Sometimes they lose humility. My litmus, I think no matter what pathway somebody is on, the simple litmus test for me is I look for gratitude.
Well,
if somebody is present and has gratitude in their life, I want to hire them.
And that doesn't even have anything to do with recovery necessarily.
Yeah, oh, exactly,
I'm just grateful for life and grateful for the opportunity you have. Those are the best people to hire.
Yeah.
You and I agree with that 100%. That's what I look forward to.
People that are clinicians now, that with telehealth, they can be in their basement and they can make a good living, a little socially isolated, but they have to work in a nonprofit like my agency, they have got to believe in the mission. They've got to, believe in the purpose and get up in the morning and really have some gratitude to see it is an honor to be able to have the privilege of working with individuals in their recovery path. And that's who I want to have work for me.
We were just talking the other day about coaching, and I see it in you too, is this incessant curiosity about people and what makes them go and where they are, how they're wired. And the more I coach people, the more my curiosity grows, because I'm never quite sure what the next person is going to say or do or how they're going to respond. Yeah. And when you start thinking that everybody's the same or they all have to do the same thing, it gets boring. You get burned out. If you only have one solution to keep offering people, that's all you got.
Yeah.
But now you don't. I don't have any answers. I only have questions. I only have questions. Tell me about what you want to do. I want to hear about this. How can I help you do that?
I think that sense of like getting out of like, your comfort level and keeping that humble lens of I've never seen this person before. I've always done that with families. Is like when you come in with a preconceived notion of like how a family operates, you're already in trouble.
Right.
So, this guy Carl Whitaker used to say the techniques are what you use until the therapist shows up in the room, right? So it's that idea that, that's oftentimes what gives people confidence, but it should never get in the way of listening to the person and the family in the room. And that's the key is really being able to have that humble lens of not knowing. And I'm here to learn. I'm here with genuine, authentic curiosity without judgment, because I'm fascinated by, how people, people's stories and family stories and individual stories. And I think they like going to like getting outside of your comfort zone, as like going to Vietnam and helping them set up that voluntary treatment system. When you went over there, that was pretty humbling. You really had to listen in a different way. When you're in a different country in a very different place, you realize, wow, you even had less answers than you thought you did. You have to listen to what their answers are and what their solution is. And that's kind of why I sent you over there, because they didn't even have a workforce for counselors. They're trying to set up a voluntary treatment system, but they have no treatment. So what's the best place? Where's the best place to start? They could actually do it right? They were able to get, recovery coaching training in to get people with lived experience as their workforce. What a wonderful opportunity. I mean, they still a long way to go, but I think you and Courtney helped them out.
Well, even the idea that they interpreted recovery far differently than we did. They just thought you just stop drug use. Drug use, not, like the woman that was there drinking the fifth of Jack Daniels every, that'll last me a day or two, but it was just fascinating.
It's different. I set up helped set up a co-occurring treatment system in the Cayman Islands, and I was working with the Ministry of Health, and it was cool because you get mail that says for Her Majesty's service, and it was kind of neat. It wasn't the worst job I ever had to go to the Cayman Islands.
Pretty good.
But I remember I was saying, like, when we were setting up, they said the problem is like cocaine and and alcohol, a lot of alcohol misuse, and I was like, okay, we can set that up. I said, do you want us to address marijuana issues? And the minister looked at me and says, that's a problem. Like they didn't even have it on their radar screen of like marijuana being an issue. It was like, oh, there was my bias coming and thinking that they wanted some help there. But that was, I don't know. I think that was maybe part of their tourist industry and not really seen as a problem in the same sense that they.
Or is it cultural that everybody does
May
it?
have been a cultural thing, yeah. So again, it was that humble lens of not knowing. I had no clue. So
Yeah.
I just have to first listen and pay attention to what people need and what they tell me they need, and not feel like I have some level of like arrogance that I have the solutions. And by the way, I said before, I want people to work for me. I never want people to work. I want people to work with me. So I go on record to say that.
No, I also feel the same way.
Yeah.
I didn't take that. But sometimes you're seen as the boss, whether you feel like you're the boss or not. You are the boss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because I think another part is I like to get things done, and I realized early on in my career I was like I want to take charge of things so I can get things done, and then you get to a place where you get to be the boss where you feel like there's no accountability, and then you get to like the CEO, and then you find out you got 13 bosses. They're called a board of directors, and it's like, oh my goodness, how ironic, right? So you have more bosses than you ever had before.
All right.
And so that's humbling, right? To kind of realize that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I've been blessed with a board of directors that has been super supportive. So, and you've been a big part of that over all the years. I mean, you did a 9-year term, took a year off, and almost ready to complete another 9 years, aren't you?
I am, and I am so honored and privileged to be part of CCAR. And I tell anyone who will listen that I'm involved in the CCAR board, and I just can't believe. I'm just so excited about with the direction that you and your staff have brought CCAR. It's just incredible. It's just it's very humbling to see the great work you're doing and the difference you're making in people's lives.
Well, thank you, but I always, a lot like you, I just attribute it to the team around me.
You got
yourself
great
with
team.
great people.
Yeah, and you've picked out talent. I'll tell you that. You've got a great team.
Well, so do you.
Yeah, yeah. We've both been fortunate.
Yeah. Thank you, John. I've enjoyed this.
This was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.